For today's Sutta class, we're going to be looking at Majjhima Nikaya number 141, the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta. This particular discourse has a considerable importance in the scheme of things in Buddha's teachings, as it is a detailed analysis of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. And while, in fact, we could understand many of the suttas in the canon, you could even understand the whole canon as a commentary on the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, since the Buddha said that all of his teachings included within the Four Noble Truths. So essentially the Buddha's teachings consist of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta plus commentary. But this particular sutta actually sets itself up as a commentary on the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. It's not just an implied commentary, it actually explicitly says it is. Discourse has a number of parallels. Majjhima Agama number 31 from the Sarvastivadin school, Taisho number 32, which is an interesting one because the Taisho number 32 as an individual translation, not included in any of the collections, but this one was translated by Ansha Gao. And Ansha Gao was one of the very earliest of the translators of texts into Chinese. He was working around 100 AD or so, I think. In the 2nd century, yeah. 2nd century AD, yeah. So Ansha Gao, a Parthian, renounced his claim to the throne of Parthia to serve as a Buddhist missionary monk in China. Arrived in China in 148 AD, produced a substantial number of translations of Indian Buddhist texts and attracted a devoted community of followers. So his schools all come from the early Buddhist, early Buddhism, and rather than Mahayana sources, most closely affiliated with the Sarvastivadin school. So that gives a certain reminder of the importance or the centrality of the text. It was one of the very earliest texts translated into Chinese. In addition to those ones, it's also found in the Ekottara Agama at number 27, probably Mahasangika school. And a large portion of the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta is also included as part of the as the explanation of the Four Noble Truths in the Sariputta Sutta of the Digha Nikaya. Now, when I was doing a history of mindfulness, I noted these parallels. I also noted that in the modern Burmese edition of the canon, the Sariputta Sutta has actually been moved to the Majjhima Nikaya, as we can see, for example, by clicking here, Sariputta Sutta, bingo, here's the Pali text of it. Oops, no, sorry, here's the Pali text of it. And it says, this is Majjhima Nikaya number 10, so it should be the Sariputta Sutta, but it starts out Sariputta Sutta. And as we see in the text on Dhammanupassana, the Four Noble Truths, it has the whole long section on the Four Noble Truths taken from the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta, which it shouldn't have. That's the Digha Nikaya version, not the Majjhima Nikaya version, and yet it's been included in the Majjhima Nikaya without acknowledgement or protest, apparently, by anyone except, no one except for me seems to think there's something wrong with actually going around and changing the Tripitaka in order to develop support for your own particular meditation system, which is what the Mahasi people have done. Anyway, moving right along.
So you're saying that this was not part of the This was not the format in the Burmese canon 100 years ago. This is like a modern.
It's a modern alteration. It's not sure exactly how modern. It probably was in the Burmese canon 100 years ago. In the Majjhima Nikaya, yeah, because it's referred to as a peculiarity of the Burmese edition in the PTS edition of the Majjhima Nikaya, which I think was published around 1880. So I suspect it was added at what they call the Fifth Council, which was in Burma when was in Burma at Fifth Council? Anyone got a date for me? No, that was the Sixth Council. Sixth Council... Oh, no, Fifth Council of the Lateran. No. Thank you. Fifth Buddhist Council, 1871 in Burma.
But that was before the whole Vipassana movement, wasn't it?
Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, the dating at that time is uncertain. You could also read it as saying that that's evidence for the Vipassana movement starting around that time. I don't know much about the Fifth Council, and I'm really not sure of all of the dates. I mean, the idea that it was there in Burma before that time, I mean, it's just a footnote in an obscure reference in the Pali Text Society edition. Exactly what happened, it would be interesting because it has the marble slabs of that in Burma. It would be interesting to look at that, and that's got the actual text. So, and if it is included there, it would be interesting to see where it came from, why that particular textual change was made.
Have you checked the Sinhalese version?
Yeah, Sinhalese version doesn't have it.
Doesn't it?
No.
No, Maha.
Yeah, but what you have now, because the Burmese edition has become so predominant, that since the Sixth Council, so now most of the editions, all the online editions, and even now the Sinhalese and Thai editions are starting to be influenced by that. So this version here, Tipitaka Studies, this is actually a Thai organisation. It's a Thai group who've done that and published it, and they've now published the Burmese text of that. So it's actually basically has infiltrated.
And how many Khmer version?
Sorry?
Khmer, Cambodian.
Cambodian, I don't know.
Actually,
They have, yeah. Yeah.
So I think, okay, I will check.
But can't find it online, yeah. I assume, from what I can see, we can have a look at the footnote in the Pali Text Society, because they refer to the then current Thai and Burmese editions, Sinhalese editions, and they don't have any they don't have then, so I don't think that they actually do have it. Now I can find it on here. This might be interesting. I haven't looked at this. So this is the Chula Tom Glau of Siam Pali Tipitaka. So this is from 1893. And if I don't know, I've never actually used it, so I'm not sure how to find my way around it. Just going page by page. No. So that's doing there. Search, archive, reference. Should be able to go in there. I don't think that's it. They actually have like the image of the scanned image of the text here, but it just doesn't seem to be working properly. I'm not sure what's going on there. So, but anyway, this edition here. So this is the Thai edition. This was the first printed edition published by the printed edition anywhere, modern printed edition, published by the King of Thailand in 1893.
So is this version based on the Burmese?
I doubt it, but that was what we were going to try to check. But I don't think it was. would have been based on the traditional Thai version. Yeah, Mahavibhanga. So this is the Vinaya, Mahavibhanga. I'm just wondering how to actually go through. They do have the whole text online. I just don't know how to find it. That's all. The Sariputta, profile. I've got all this promotional material, but can't actually find the thing.
Try searching International Tipitaka Chulalongkorn. You might have a PDF.
Maybe. Have you found that before?
Well, I just know that they have this big library at Chulalongkorn and they have all this stuff. And then I'm guessing they would have a PDF version.
Yeah, that'd be a nightmare. I won't go and have a look for it, because finding stuff in Thai and then searching for it and all that kind of thing is. It should be on this site. It is. It is on this site. I've used it before, but it just seems to be. How exactly you find it?
Search key.
Yeah, maybe. Search. No, something's not really working. Anyway, as far as I'm aware, that edition of that shift in the Satipatthana Sutta is only present in the Burmese texts, and later came to infiltrate the other versions. Another interesting fact about the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta, or important point, is that much of the material in the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta is also found in the Abhidhammas. And in fact, this is something which unfortunately is not represented either on Sutta Central or in Venerable Analayo's otherwise excellent study. But if we have a look in the Abhidhamma Vibhanga, so here we have the Vinaya and Suttas, which is what we mostly study. Here is the Abhidhamma Pitaka. And so notice the books we have here. It's a slightly misleading way of organising it. These are actual books. Dhammasangani, Vibhanga, Dhatu Katha, Pugala Panyati, Katha Vatu. And these are also books, and these are chapters of books. So that looks like it's a list of books, but actually it's not quite. So this is the Yamaka, Patana. And so this is all the chapters of the Patana. Okay. So the Abhidhamma book that we're interested in is called the Vibhanga. So, of course, the Vibhanga having a strong relationship with the chapter of the Majjhima Nikaya that we're looking at now, which is called the Vibhanga Vagga. So this is the analysis, and you can see from the list of the chapters in the Vibhanga of the Abhidhamma, Khandha Vibhanga, Ayatana Vibhanga, Dhatu Vibhanga, same as the name of the sutta that we read just a couple of days ago. Sacca Vibhanga, the same as the name of the sutta we're reading today. Ayatana Vibhanga, and so on. Paticca Samuppada. So these very similar to the relative suttas. So the Satipatthana Vibhanga has a strong relationship with the Satipatthana Sutta. Paticca Samuppada Vibhanga has a strong relationship with the Vibhanga Sutta of dependent origination, and so on. So essentially what this book does is it takes passages from the suttas and it gives an analytical presentation. So it takes an analytical presentation of them from the suttas, and then it analyzes them further. Notice here, this is the Sacca Vibhanga. Okay, so it has two sections: Suttanta Bhajaniya and Abhidhamma Bhajaniya. So this is the analysis or exposition in accordance with the suttas and the exposition in accordance with the Abhidhamma. So if you look at the analysis in accordance with the suttas, to start with, what we have is this. Oops, I clicked on Paticca Samuppada by mistake. I wanted to go to... Where am I? I wanted to go to Sacca. So here's Sacca, so it has the two. Okay, so it has the two, Suttanta, Abhidhamma, and then it has the Panha Puccaka, which is basically an extended version of the Abhidhamma Bhajaniya. It's just a question and answer section. Now, under the Suttanta Bhajaniya, this is what we find. Chattari Arya Satchani Dukkhang Arya Satchang Dukkha Samudayang Arya Satchang Dukkha Nirodhang Arya Satchang Dukkha Nirodhagamini Patipada Arya Satchang. There are four noble truths: noble truth of suffering, the origin of suffering, the ending of suffering, and the way of practice leading to the ending of suffering. And then it goes on to analyze each of those four truths. So this, notice how this analytical method that's being used is basically identical with the analytical method we find in such suttas as the Vibhanga Vagga, right? The presentation of a summary and then the detailed explanation of each of the points in that summary. So it's very, very closely linked with this literature. And katamang dukkhang arya satchang jatipi dukkha jarapi dukkha maranampi dukkhang sok aparideva dukkha domana supayasapi dukkha apiyehi sampayogo dukkho piyehi vipayogo dukkho yampichang nalabhati tampi dukkhang sankitena panchupadana kandha dukkha. So it's just the standard definition of the noble truth of suffering according to the, directly quoting from the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Birth is suffering, aging suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair. Not associating with the disliked, separation from the like, not getting what you want, and in brief, the five aggregates of grasping are suffering. And then it goes on, analyze it further. And what's birth? What in those, of all those different beings, in those different classes of beings, is birth, conception, descent, reappearance, the manifestation of the aggregates, the gaining of the senses. This is called birth. And what is aging? What in those different kinds of beings and those different orders of beings is aging, agedness, elderliness, and so on. So the standard, the breaking of the teeth and those kinds of things. And so these are the standard definitions. We'll look at them again in the sutta we're going to be looking at. So this is all basically pretty much quoted from the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta. There, of course, are some minor differences, but basically it's just a direct quote from that. And that's the Suttanta Bhajaniya, the Suttanta section of the Abhidhamma Vibhanga. If we look at the Abhidhamma Bhajaniya, it goes off in a slightly different direction. Again, starts by stating the Four Noble Truths. Tattari Satchani Dukkhang Dukkha Samudaya Dukkha Nirodha Dukkha Nirodhagamini Patipada. So it's basically the same, but notice that there's a slight shift in the feel of it. It's no longer so directly quoting from the suttas, and it's become a little bit more technical. It's no longer saying Arya Satchani, Dukkhang Arya Satchang. It's not so much it's moving away from a ordinary language presentation towards a just a technical list of these things. Okay, so what is the origin of suffering? And then it replaces the sutta definition of the origin of suffering. It's interesting, it starts with the origin of suffering. It's curious, I didn't notice that before. So that's a change, isn't it? So it starts with the origin of suffering. It doesn't start with suffering. It's curious. And then rather than the sutta definition of the origin of suffering, it goes tanha, ayang vucchati dukkha samudaya, craving. This is called the origin of suffering. What is suffering? The remaining defilements, the remaining akusala, unwholesome dhammas, the three roots of unwholesome together with defilements, and the remaining defiled wholesome dhammas, the defiled kusala, wholesome and wholesome dhamma results, and whatever dhammas are effective that are neither wholesome, that are wholesome or not, that are neither wholesome nor unwholesome, nor are the result of action and all of form, this is called dukkha. Right? Now here we have a much different kind of definition of what dukkha. We've moved away from a sort of the real life terminology. It's not just getting aging and sick and all of those things, but we now have an explanation in terms of the analytical categories of the Abhidhamma itself. And of course we can only really make sense of that passage by understanding the rest of the Abhidhamma. It's a very integrated system. So I'm not going to go into the details of this. I'm just aiming to show you here what this text basically consists of, how it starts with the suttas and then moves on in its own direction. What is the ending of suffering? Dukkha nirodha, the abandoning of craving. This is called dukkha nirodha. Again, quite a different definition, not necessarily a contradictory definition from the suttas, but somewhat different. And what is the way of practice leading to the end of suffering? The last noble truth. Here a bhikkhu, on whatever occasion that he develops lokuttara jhana, introducing the concept of lokuttara jhana, not found in the suttas, which is leading out, going to crossing over, which is for the abandoning of all wrong views, which is for the attainment of the first stage, that is stream entry, and then goes on to the jhana formula, viviceva kamehi, vivicha kusalehi. It abbreviates because it's already had this passage a lot of times before in the text. Enters the first jhana, which is a painful way of practice of slow, direct knowledge. On that occasion, the Eightfold Path exists, somewhat right view, and so on and so forth. And it then goes on to repeat that with all the various different jhanas, the pleasant way of practice, the swift insight, and all of the different variations you can possibly imagine. So basically what this is doing is it's redefining the Noble Path rather than being the Eightfold Path as a whole. The Noble Eightfold Path is something that is purely the Lokuttara jhana. It purely happens at an experience of meditation when you're sitting, and all of those path factors come together at the time when you're actually realizing stream entry. And that is what the Abhidhamma calls the path. Okay?
But why here it mentioned about the dukkha patiparam, danda
Danda Binyan, yeah.
Yeah.
It go. Yeah, it's a bit curious, but it goes on to then make all the relevant permutations. So then it'll go on, it'll repeat the whole thing, but it will replace it with sukha patipadang and kippa binyang. If you look a little bit lower down, it'll have all those different variations. I'm not sure why that is in there. Go on, yeah.
Would you go back to explain the relationship of this Abhidhamma text with the Majjhima Nikaya text that we're studying?
Okay. So to go back over the explanation, here's the Vibhanga of the so here's the Abhidhamma.
I mean, what is the relationship between them? Like, what came first? Why did people create the Abhidhamma version of it, or is there a storyline behind it, or how does it fit together?
Once upon a time, I don't know.
Especially when you see so much material right there that has nothing to do with the sutta.
Yeah, so what's going on is that you have the Suttanta Bhajaniya, which is more or less a direct quote from the suttas, yeah. Then the Abhidhamma Bhajaniya, where it goes on with its own Abhidhamma analysis, and the Panhapuccika, which is a further sort of basically the Panhapuccika is like interrogation for students to make sure they've understood stuff.
So Bhante, is the Abhidhamma analysis is taking the sutta and restating it in a way to fit in with the Abhidhamma understanding of the world? Essentially,
yeah.
Very much scholastic.
Very scholastic, yeah.
And we're, in terms of, I'm just trying to think of a little tiny bit of knowledge of the history of things. You had the Sarvastivadins. They had a split, and you ended up with Theravadins and the
Yeah.
Theravadins, is that
Uh-huh.
เพราะ
correct?
ว่าที่ปัจจุบันเนี่ยone cat of Abhidhamma one and it's not compatible with the Theravada Abhidhamma. I study Travativada Abhidhamma and
Yeah.
Theravada Abhidhamma Pasanta, and it's not all your hand.
It's not all the same, yeah.
It means Abhidhamma quiet, people have on a big school.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just
Which-
one step away from being just like the people who thought that the sun went around the world.
Okay.
And like I thought the whole world went around Theravada, and
Uh-huh,
so I'm
uh-huh.
still just trying to like reorient from thinking the world went around Theravada,
Okay. Yeah.
and everything else was just a thorn on the bush.
Okay. Yeah.
So, like, where does this Theravada Abhidhamma fit into the whole bigger picture of Buddhism?
Where does it fit into the whole bigger picture of Buddhism?
Or does it?
In 5 words or not? Then okay. So here we have the Buddha. Yay. Okay. And the Buddha taught Dhamma Vinaya. Right? Then he died. Ooh.
Frowny face would be more appropriate than a phone, so okay.
Yeah, that's what it's frowny face. Oh, here we go. Oh, but actually, it just depends on who you're. If you're Mahakassapa, then you're like that.
I think that's a tangent.
Okay, so then you had the first council. And at the first council, they would have settle and formulate the suttas and the Vinaya to some degree. Okay, but there's no Abhidhamma. Then second council, then you get to argue about Vinaya, and probably redact the texts. Actually, the Vinaya accounts of the second council don't really talk about text redaction at the second council, but there are various remarks and so on that say that texts were redacted there. So we assume that there was some activity. Then you have the third council. So this is the time of King Ashoka. The times.
Yeah, like how far the council is apart.
1 AN. 100 AN.
So nobody lived in nobody who attended the first council attended the second council.
That's right. Yeah. Although they say that the eldest monk in the world at the time of the second council was a monk called Sabbakamin, and Sabbakamin was a Sadiviharika of Venerable Ananda. So even though he wasn't alive when the Buddha was alive, he was a student of Ananda. They also say, of course, then there's a story in Upagupta of the oldest nun in the world who actually was a young girl in the time of the Buddha. But whether that's true or not is not certain. So around and sometime after that, roughly. So that time is that's kind of more than that, probably. It depends. It depends when you date the Parinibbana. It depends when you date the Parinibbana. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So if Ashoka was in, let's see, Okay, so Ashoka was 300 to 232 BC. So let's say the Second Council was roughly at 250 BC. Yeah. Third Council. So roughly at 250 BC. Okay. So these are all very roughly. So, but I would take the First Council at probably around 410 to 420, maybe 420 BCE. Oops.
You can check in Chulavaga.
So that would be places. I would say around 310. What I'm saying, something like that. 410. So this would be around 310. The Second Council. Yeah, 310. So then, if the Third Council's about 250, if the Third Council's around 250 BCE, then that places it 150 years, maybe say 160 years after Nibbana. But all the dates there are so variable, we can't pin too much of it. The only date that we know with much certainty is the dates of Ashoka. We know reasonably certainly, but we don't know when in the time of Ashoka that the Third Council was. But that's probably correct within a decade or two. And we know the date between those, but we don't know the absolute date of those very much. So roughly speaking. So in the Third Council, we then had the redaction including Abhidhamma. Maybe. I have my doubts about that, but anyway, we'll say redaction including Abhidhamma. Now the third. Sorry. The Parivara. You mean? The end of the Chulavagga, because that has the accounts of the councils in there. That's true, yeah. So I'm assuming here that the redaction of the suttas, and especially the Vinaya, is ongoing in that period. But so the suttas and Vinaya are more or less formulated over that period. So the Abhidhamma, according to the traditional Theravadan account, is included there. I have my doubts about that. Now, after the Third Council, we then have the missionary activity and formation of the schools. Okay, so we then have the emergence we have the first schism somewhere around that time. So let's say the first schism, let's just pick a number out of a hat, shall we? Say 150 or say 200 BCE.
Was it an official schism or just this kind of drifting apart?
Yeah, this was the Mahasangika. Who knows? There was certainly some acrimony there anyway.
I think Mahasangika formed just 100 years after the Buddha Nibbana.
Yeah, no, that's not correct. But anyway, I won't go into it. But that's a mistake, Aya. That's based on the Deepa Vangsa. It's a mistake. If you have a look in my Sects and Sectarianism, then I show that in quite some detail. Yeah. Okay, so first schism, Mahasangika Theravada, happened after the time of King Ashoka. At the same time as the schism was happening, or around the same period, we also had the gradual differentiation of schools. That is to say that you had an acrimonious split where two schools said, we don't want to live with you and we're going to go off and do our own thing. But at the same time, you also had a movement where schools sort of drifted apart not in any particularly acrimonious way, but mostly just because they were separated. The nature of the Arahant. That was the basic schism with the Mahasanghika and Theravada, and then you have the in the Abhidhamma period, and then the Abhidhamma period here.
I'm sorry, sir, was Theravada existent then?
Not Theravada as we know it today. Let's call it let's call it Theria, just to differentiate. So that's just the original school. Abhidhamma period, schools formulate Abhidhammas. Now, so we're now talking maybe 100 BCE. Very, very roughly. Don't take any of these dates too seriously. So, as the schools separate, they gradually form their own Abhidhammas. Now, what's actually happening with these Abhidhammas have two roles.
Did you mean another 100 years after 200 BCE to become 300 BCE?
No, 100 BCE.
Are you going back in time? No. Okay.
Yeah, because we're still BCE. Yeah, we're in negative space. Because we're in Australia, it's all upside down. Yeah. Abhidhamma springs from two main motivations. One is to clarify and unify, and two is to So you basically have these two tendencies in the Abhidhamma. On the one hand, the Abhidhamma is just there to help understand the Dhamma, to say, well, look, we've got all these suttas from different places, the Buddha's teaching different things at different times, let's find a systematic way of presenting that. And you can understand a lot of it would just come from things like the lecturer's notes. You've got a school curriculum. Yeah, you make things more systematic. You organise it, and you say, look, we've got to bring these students in. We've got to teach them the Dhamma, and so you gradually work out a more systematic way of doing it. So that's one motivation for the Dhamma, and you can see that's very much lies behind something like the Vibhanga. Here we have here, right? You can see that actually serves pretty well that purpose, doesn't it? You've got the khandhas, the ayatanas, the elements, the tremble truths, the indriyas, dependent origination, satipatthana, the right efforts, iddhipadas, awakening factors, the Eightfold Path, jhanas, the four Brahma Viharas, the precepts, and so you've got all these major Dhamma categories. You put them all together, bring the most important quotes from the suttas on those things, and you give them, and that's a pretty good syllabus for studying and learning Dhamma. And so that's one important aspect of what the Abhidhamma does.
So does that actually get into Vinaya in detail? The Sikha?
No, the Sikkhapada is not about Vinaya. That's about the 5 precepts. Yeah. And then it has these other things at the end, which I won't go into, but are also very interesting. So this is what the Abhidhamma... And the other thing the Abhidhamma does is it argues for one's own sectarian position. So what it says, it's not just a neutral presentation of Dhamma. In many cases, it is perfectly neutral, right? Again, have a look at this, what we just looked at here in the Suttanta Bhajaniya. It's basically just quoting from the suttas. There's nothing sectarian about it. It's merely presenting the material from the suttas and giving it in an organised fashion for students to learn. But then when it comes on to the Abhidhamma Bhajaniya, it introduces this notion of lokuttara jhana. And it says that, for example, and it says that the path is something that you're only experiencing while you're sitting in this state of lokuttara jhana. And so right livelihood isn't actually going out and earning a living anymore. Livelihood is redefined as the abstention from wrong livelihood that happens at that time when you're sitting in that lokuttara jhana. Okay? And that's Well, it's quite a different way of thinking and talking about the path, okay? Now notice that here this isn't, and it's important to notice this isn't the mind moment path of the later Abhidhamma tradition, clearly. Yeah? It says on which occasion one develops the Lokuttara jhana. You can't develop a mind moment, it just happens and then it's finished. It develops it for the abandoning of wrong views, yeah? And of course it has a standard jhana formula. One enters and abides. You can't abide in a mind moment. By the time you've sat down on your chair, it's over. There's no abiding in it. So this is not, there's no sense of mind moments here, but this is talking about a meditation attainment which is somehow distinguished from ordinary jhanas, lokiya jhanas, and it's a lokuttara jhana. And it's that moment which, according to the Abhidhamma analysis, is the path. And that's just one of the many innovations in the presentation of the teachings which the Abhidhamma introduces.
Yeah, one of the innovations was clarifying the jhana factor, just jhana state into 5 states.
Mm-hmm.
In the sutta, we have 4 steps.
Right.
First jhana, second jhana, third jhana, and fourth jhana. But in Abhidhamma, there is 5 states of the jhana.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, this will insert a lot of ideas.
Yeah. So now what we find is that, and I'll see if I can do that. So then coming back to this, now, so imagine you have a situation where you have these different schools all over India. You know, you have the Mahavihara Vasans down in Sri Lanka. You have the people up in Kashmir and Gandhara, others in Patna and others in Avanti and some in the Himalayas and so on. And they're all going about doing their Dhamma business, right? They're all teaching and practicing and doing all of their things. They've all inherited a similar stock of suttas and vinaya. So they all have pretty much the same suttas and vinaya, as we see every time we do a sutta class and we do the comparative study, and we see that the suttas that they have are pretty much the same. And as in the vinaya class, when we have a look at that, we had a look at the Patimokkha's last night, we see the Patimokkha's they have are almost identical. But in terms of this material, they developed independently, more or less, okay? And there's quite substantial differences between them. Now, the more or less is 2 things. So, what's similar in the Abhidhamma? Similar in the Abhidhammas is 2 kinds of things. One is where the Abhidhamma draws on the suttas. Okay? So that's one kind of thing which you find similar. Right? Of course, they have the same suttas, so that they'll quote from those suttas, and there's similarities there. The other thing that they have, and that's a major part of Abhidhamma, of course, right? I mean, when we say they have different Abhidhammas, it doesn't mean they're completely different kinds of things. It just means that they explain some things in different ways. And the other kind of thing is parallel, developments.
Who invents the Abhidhamma? Is it just random people?
Abhidhamma teachers.
So they just make up their own stuff, or they kind of different teachers, and then it kind of gets accumulated, and then
It would be accumulated in the knowledge in different monasteries, but it would be, a lot of it would come from particular sort of leading teachers or influential ones. I mean, the fact of the matter is that you can teach whatever you like, but if no one's going to listen to what you say, it doesn't really matter. So the Abhidhamma people who came up with the Abhidhamma were the people that people listened to.
They hear about Mr. Rowe's book.
Right, yeah.
Just the popular way to explain things.
Yeah, yeah.
It says that the type of member Sariputta and who create the Abhidhamma.
Right.
Sariputta had the tendency to explain everything in very detailed manner.
Right.
In the number, a lot of number. Abhidhamma famous for using the number.
Right, yeah.
So they said that when the disciple of Ananda and disciple of Aniputta tend to be the continue the Suttanga tradition.
Right.
And disciple of Venerable Sariputta tend to continue the tradition to develop the Dhamma in number and explain it in a mathematical way.
Yeah, and that's very much the sutta that when we finally get round back to the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta, of course, features Venerable Sariputta, so that's a very direct example of that tendency. So the other similarities that you find in the Abhidhamma is where that they share things that are not found in the suttas, but are found common among the various Abhidhammas. An example of that being the notion of swabhava, or inherent existence, which is found both in the Theravadan and Sarvasivadan Abhidhammas, and presumably in other places. And those kinds of parallel developments occasionally might come from either just similar processes of development in the different schools, but perhaps more likely to come from mutual influence between the schools. Remember that there was no period when the schools were completely independent, and indeed one of the books of the Pali Abhidhamma consists of nothing but discussions among the Abhidhamma teachers of different schools. So they clearly were having these kinds of discussions, and clearly there was mutual influence there.
What about proto-Abhidhammas?
Uh-huh.
Would it be possible also?
Okay, so I'll come now. Yeah, proto-Abhidhammas is another thing. Okay, so that's where the Abhidhamma draws on the suttas. So you have a text like the one we're looking at today, the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta, could be considered as a proto-Abhidhamma text. Now, if you take that sutta and say the Sariputta Sutta and the Paticcasamuppada Vibhanga Sutta and a bunch of other Vibhanga Suttas as listed in the list of contents here, and simply bind them together in a book, yeah, you'd have something which is pretty similar to the Suttanta Bhajaniya of this first, or the bulk of the Abhidhamma Vibhanga. Now,
I'm sorry, Bhante, say that again in different words. If you bound them together, you didn't have to do what?
with something that was pretty similar to the Suttanta Bhajaniya of the Vibhanga. That's what I'm pointing to here.
I thought if you took the suttas themselves.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Collected them together, actually it wouldn't be too dissimilar. And that's obviously where it started. Now, the interesting thing about this, I'm not sure if I can actually find this, but let's have a look. Is that while generally speaking it's true to say that the Abhidhammas of the schools are quite distinct and in many ways formed in opposition to each other, but at the same time it's also true to say that there are some significant points of similarity. And the most significant of those points of similarity is in this work that we're looking at right here, the Vibhanga. And there are three Abhidhamma works, the Pali Vibhanga, which is this one, the Sarvasivadan Dharmaskandha, and the text from the Dharmaguptaka school known as the Sariputta Abhidhamma Shastra, all of which seem to hark back to a pre-schismatic Abhidhamma text, which essentially is like what I just described there. It's that group of topics, get the suttas from those group of topics, put them all together and give some explanation for them, and that's your first Abhidhamma text. Now, here on the screen we have, in a very ugly font, let me just see if I can do something about this, excuse me, where do I go? Things. Excuse me. Oh God. Good. Okay. Okay. So that looks a bit better. Right. Here's the Dharmaskandha. So this is the Sarvastivadin equivalent of the Abhidhamma Vibhanga. And it begins, avidya pratyaya sanskara. Avidya pratyaya sankhara. Ignorance is a condition for formations or activities. Of course, the first line of the dependent origination. Now, this Dharmaskandha here is only fragments, okay? So it doesn't make sense in the same way that the Vibhanga Vibhanga does. So it has dependent origination. And then it says, what is ignorance? Sammoha, pramoha, moha, mohajam. This is called ignorance. It's like a dictionary, and very much the same as the Pali Abhidhamma Vibhanga. Yeah, is listing a bunch of synonyms for the word. So then goes on talk about sankappa and so on. Now, I don't want to go too much into that. I'll just see if there's anything. The discussion of dependent origination is actually quite interesting, and is probably more interesting than the one in the Vibhanga. But what else do we have here? Karuna. Okay, so then we have another topic here, is the Maitri Ceta Samadhi, the meditation on loving kindness. Of course, this being under the topic of Apamanya, which is also found in the Vibhanga. Right? So this is the immeasurables, and it has a discussion of that. Now, I'm not going to go too much in detail into this particular text, but this text was discussed and analysed in some detail by Eric Frauwellner. And Frauwellner discussed these three texts, the Pali Vibhanga, the Dharmaskandha, and the Sariputta Abhidhamma Shastra. And he came to the conclusion that all of these three texts drew upon a pre-existing proto-Abhidhamma text, which was held in common before these schools separated. So it's a pre-sectarian Abhidhamma text. And one of the reasons why he came to that conclusion, which I think is a very solid conclusion, is not merely the fact that they share the list of topics in common. Okay, so this list of topics is a very common list of Dhamma topics, and it's quite possible that many different texts could have that list in common, but there are also some specific details about the nature of the discussion which were found, which are not standard, but which are shared among those three texts. And I haven't read Frauwellner for quite some time, but I believe this one here, the Kudakavattu Vibhanga, is one of those details. Kudakavattu essentially is a list of defilements, and that is somewhat unusual. It's not a kind of standard sort of a list of various kinds of just dhammas. The infatuation with birth, infatuation with family, infatuation with health, infatuation with youth, infatuation with life, infatuation with gains, infatuation with respect, infatuation with worship, and so on. And so it's a long kind of list of different kinds of defilements, and then analysis of that. And it's not a particularly standard thing, right? It's not something which you find so commonly, but something like that is found in all of those three texts. So this is one of those reasons why it's actually quite a strong conclusion to say that these three texts, the Vibhanga, the Dharmaskandha, and the Sariputta Abhidhamma, do in fact all draw from the same pre-sectarian Abhidhamma text, which itself would have basically been mostly the collection of suttas and their analyses. And of course, as the Vibhanga itself says, that that's the bit that would have been in common, the Suttanta Bhajaniya, and these bits, of course, the Abhidhamma Bhajaniya and the Panhapuccaka were developed later. Okay. So is that clear enough for that? Okay, we can now actually go to the sutta. Right. I hadn't intended to spend so long on the introduction, but there you go. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in Benares, and at the deer park, and then he spoke to the bhikkhus, and he said, Venerable Sir, and he said, I should say here that the text I'm using is the excellent dual text by Venerable Ananda Jyoti. So thank you very much, Venerable Ananda Jyoti, for doing this for the world. and we have the Pali text and the literal.
Is that available for a lot of other suttas?
He has a number. If you look at the text, there's a website, ancientbuddhisttexts.net. Yeah, he's done some, not huge amounts, but a reasonable amount of suttas are done like that. Yeah, so. On one occasion, the gracious one. So he's using his own translations here. So we get to see how people choose to translate things a bit differently. That's still a bit small, isn't it? Is that better? Is that good? Yeah. Okay. At one time, the gracious one was dwelling near Benares in the deer park at Isipatana. There it was that the gracious one addressed the monks saying, gracious one's quite nice, isn't it? Addressed the monks saying, monks, Reverend Sir, those monks replied to the gracious one, and the gracious one said this: the realized one, the Tathagata, amongst the worthy one, the perfect Sambuddha, while the Benares in the deer park at Isipatana has set rolling the unsurpassed Dhamma wheel, and it cannot be rolled back by any ascetic or by Brahmin or by a god or a demon or a deity or by anyone in the world. That is to say, the explanation, revealing, making known, setting forth, opening up, analysing and making plain of the Four Noble Truths. Okay, what for? The Noble Truth of suffering, origin of suffering, ending of suffering, and the way of practice leading to the ending of suffering. And then he goes on to repeat the statement, and then he says, bhikkhus, you should associate with Sariputta and Moggallana. Keep company with Sariputta and Moggallana. They are wise bhikkhus who assist those living in the holy life. Sariputta is just like one who gives birth, janeti, so he's like your mum. And Moggallana is just like a wet nurse.
Is he insulting them?
To the one newborn. No, he's not insulting. He's saying that they're loving and they're caring and they look after you and help you and they give birth to you. Sariputta guides to the fruit of stream entry, whereas Moggallana guides to the supreme good.
Bhante, excuse me, sir, backing up a little. Sariputta Moggallana, did he often put together anyone else's names into one word like that?
Oh, I'm not sure. I can't.
Lovely.
Yeah, I can't remember. It is cute, yeah.
We need to Moggallana here.
And not everybody understood that they were even good. Some people thought that they were bad. What?
Yeah.
Some people thought they were bad. Some other monks looked down on them. Some monks thought that they were Kolita. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Kolita thought that they were evil, and when Moggallana would report his psychic experiences, monks would accuse him of Pajika, of claiming states that weren't true, and so forth. I mean, people really didn't assess them the way the Buddha did.
Maybe after that accident, incident related in the Minaya, when the Sariputta were accused with offense.
Yeah.
So maybe after that they would say something like this.
Oh, could be, yeah. He wants everyone to realise, yeah, could be. So, Sariputta's like a birth mother, Moggallana's like a wet nurse. Sariputta guides to the fruit of stream entry, and Moggallana guides to the supreme good.
What's the supreme good?
Arahantship.
Oh, so the psychic powers die, gets you further? And wisdom?
I'm not sure as if saying that it doesn't get you further than the wisdom, but maybe I think it's more to do with the manner of teaching that they would have done. It's not completely clear, but I've always thought that it probably meant that because it then sort of says, well, Sariputta is able to analyse and explain the Four Noble Truths. So I think what it implies is that Sariputta would give sort of general Dhamma teachings and explain the Dhamma to people, and whereas Moggallana maybe would do more like personal guidance. So he was like looking after people one by one and giving them guidance in meditation. That's how I always understood that. Yeah.
Also, speech like one is jhanas a bit.
Moggallana's jhanas are better than Sariputta's.
Well, they do give you the point.
From where I'm standing, both of them look pretty good. But anyway, go on.
I remember one of the incidents in one of the Majjhima Nikaya. when Sariputta and Mokkallana, 500 new people under them, and they were not well trained. So when they took the new disciples to see the Buddha, then there was a lot of noise, and the Buddha was annoyed, and the Buddha sent them away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And exercise Buddha doesn't say that Mokkallana and Sariputta are very good leaders.
He kicked them out, yeah.
Would you consider what little we know of their personalities too? Sariputta was so kind and so gentle and helping he would walk at the end of the line to help those who were stragglers and encourage and go around and see the sick and so forth. And maybe he just had a way that helped people open their minds to the Dhamma and have that connection with the Dhamma to attain stream entry, whereas Monastery is more severe. He would make criticisms of the monks, and he was not, so warm and fuzzy as.
Really, I hadn't thought of that before.
But also,
Moggallana is more severe. When did he get rid of them?
Oh, he's had some hard comments to make about behavior of monks.
Maybe.
You don't hear quoted in Venerable Sariputta. You don't see anything like that from him.
It's interesting.
Fuzzy with Venerable Sariputta, but Moggallana
Yeah.
is very stern.
Well, you'll have to have more than one soft and fuzzy monk. But I mean, it's interesting that Sariputta became caricatured as being the rigid, uptight monk in the later Vimalakirti Sutta and places. So.
Vimalakirti Sutta is just evil. I don't know how anybody could recite it and not go to hell.
No, I don't think it's evil. I think it's very funny.
It's cool.
I don't see how anyone could recite it and take it seriously. But anyway. Okay, so let's go on. Sariputta is capable, pahoti. So those students of Pali, notice the use of the word pahoti here, from the root hoti meaning to be, but the word pahoti has a specific meaning to be capable. Is capable of explaining, revealing, setting forth, making known, and so on, the Four Noble Truths in detail. Okay, so all of these words for explaining something in detail, one of them, of course, being vibhajitung, which is to make a vibhanga of them. This is what the Blessed One said, and then he got up from his seat and went away. Now, on that occasion, the Venerable Sariputta, after the Blessed One had not long gone away, addressed the bhikkhus saying, "Friends, avuso." And then the Venerable Sariputta said this. He repeated the initial statement of the Buddha about teaching the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and then went on to say the Four Noble Truths, suffering, the origin of suffering, the ending of suffering, and the way of practice leading to the ending of suffering, and then goes on to analyse in more detail what each of those are. So let's have a look at what each of those things, Noble Truths is. What's the Noble Truth of suffering? Birth is suffering, age is suffering, death, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. Notice that sickness is sometimes included, sometimes not. Okay. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair is suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering. And in brief, the five aggregates of grasping are suffering. Notice that this one also omits association with the disliked and separation from the loved. That's also usually there, but sometimes not. You could do a PhD and analysing when it appears where and why it doesn't and stuff. But okay, and then it goes on to look at these things in more detail. What is birth? And so this is actually the more that all the stuff up to now has more or less been the common normal teachings on the Four Noble Truths. What we're about to go into is more the Vibhanga, where it's going into detail and explaining things in more detail than you usually find in the suttas. Now, one thing that I believe about the suttas, and which I think is fundamental to the way the suttas are structured, is that these Vibhanga suttas provide a key for understanding the whole of the suttas. In other words, whenever the Buddha was teaching the Four Noble Truths, he meant the Four Noble Truths to be understood in this way. Okay? So when we look at another place and we say, what is birth? Then in order to understand what is birth in the context of the Four Noble Truths, we should look here, and then that will explain for us what birth means. Similarly, if you look, say, at the Buddha mentions maybe Sariputta. What does that mean? Then we look at the Sariputta Sutta, which is essentially a Sacca Vibhanga, and it will then explain that. And that's why I believe the early tradition assembled that proto-Abhidhamma text with that list of chapters, because once you've learnt the teachings of all of those things, then you've learnt the key to understanding the suttas. And so the suttas then, of course, refer to these central teachings again and again and again and again, but in the vast majority of times they only refer to them in passing. So it'll just name the teachings or give a short explanation or something, but the extended explanation is always, I believe, meant to be understood with reference to the explanation given in the Vibhanga Suttas.
It's also a data compression technique.
It is, yeah.
You take common stuff and put it in one place and
Yep.
you just reference it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's data compression, exactly. And you find that more used in the rest of the Buddhist tradition. Similarly, for example, the Visuddhimagga does exactly the same thing. You take all of the common teachings, the four jhanas, Four Noble Truths and all of those things, and then explain them all in the Visuddhimagga. And then whenever they come up in the suttas, it just says, well, look at the explanation in the Visuddhimagga. Yeah. The Buddhist texts are long enough. Imagine how long they'd be if you gave the full explanation of the Four Noble Truths every time it came up. Okay, so what's birth? Ya te sang sattanang dhammi satta nikaya. For the various beings and the various classes of beings, there is birth, jati. Actually, probably more correct to say jati is conception rather than birth. Sanjati definitely means conception. Okay, so it means much more specifically is conception. Kanti is literally descent of a kanti, but it is used, it's an idiomatic phrase, which is just a synonym for the word birth. Abhinibhati, again, similarly, turning up. Oh, I turned up in this new life. It's a bit difficult to find enough synonyms in Pali, but birth, conception, appearance, manifestation, something like that. Anyway, it's just another synonym. And there are plenty of passages that you can look at that show that these are in fact just synonyms. Kandhanang patubhavo, the manifestation of the khandhas, the aggregates, the gaining of the ayatanas, these sense spheres. This is called birth. Okay? So obviously is referring specifically to physical birth, nothing to do with psychological birth. And what is aging? Whatever in those various beings and various classes of beings is old age, agedness. These are basically two words formed from the same root. This kind of method of definition by using grammatical variants on the same root is something that became very common in the Abhidhamma and commentarial tradition. Khanditjang, broken teeth. Balitjang, greying hair. Valitachata, wrinkled skin.
Does jhana necessarily mean old age? I've sometimes heard it explained as aging, meaning even like from childhood to teen years is suffering.
Well, it certainly is, but
Definitely means old age.
it usually does. I mean, I think it's probably ambiguous, as in the English, like aging. You know, normally if you talk about aging, you'd think of older people, but you could also understand it more technically more broadly as the whole of life.
I think when you're going to eat it contains something, you think of it as something in the same sense as some people regard actually growing old and losing strength and freedom and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. But I mean, clearly when it goes on to more specific definitions, it's obviously talking about old age.
You can get broken teeth anytime.
Well, that's true. I broke most of my teeth when I was pretty young. Yeah.
That will reduce the suffering of aging.
Yeah. the dwindling away of the lifespan, ayano sanghani, and the decay of the sense faculties, indriyanang paripako. So it's interestingly precise description of aging, because that's, of course, exactly what happens, doesn't it? Your kind of the life, the vitality gradually dwindles away as you get older, and your senses gradually break down, yeah? This is old age. And what's death? Ya tesang sattanam samhatamha satta nikaya. So that for the... Oh, it's interesting. In various classes... Oh, I'll have to email Ananda Jyoti about this. He's got the grammar wrong here. Yeah. Anyone can see where the grammatical mistake is? I'm sorry?
Which sentence?
This one here.
Two townhouse?
No.
It's just double.
No.
There are. Is there no?
It should, no. Yes, that's right. Tamhi is the locative.
Yeah.
In the various classes of beings. Yeah? So aging is in the various classes of beings. Death, tamha satta nikaya, is ablative from the various classes of beings. Yes.
Right.
So for the various beings from the various classes of beings, there's a falling away, breaking up, disappearance, dying, death, making of time. So, in other words, it's not in the various Satta Nikaya. From that Satta Nikaya you fall, Chuti. Chavanata. Again, Chavanata and Chuti from the same root. Beheda, breaking up. That's a word that's used just to mean death. Antaradhanam, disappearance. Machu, death. Marana, mortality. Kalakirya. Okay, so like completing your time, doing your time. Running out of time, yeah. Kandhanang bhedo kale barasa nikepo. Okay, the breaking up of the khandhas and the throwing off of the body, throwing down of the body, something like that. Kale barasa. So this word kale barasa is one of the words in Pali like deha or bondi, and a few others, which specifically mean the physical body, as opposed to kaya or rupa, which often mean the physical body, but also have other meanings. But kalebarasa specifically means the kalebara, specifically the physical body. This is called death. And what's grief? For he who has some sort of misfortune or other, who is touched by some sort of pain or other, anyataranya dukkadamena puthassa soko sochana sochitatang, state of grieving. Anto soko, inner grief. Anto parisoko, inner great grief. So these are all formed from the same root. Basically just a list of synonyms.
Remember when saying sickness was not illness?
Yeah. This is called grief. Now if we have a look at the Suttanta Bhajaniya, the Dukkha Satcha, does that have this? The Suttanta Bhajaniya does not have sickness, but it does have separation from the liked and association with the disliked, and it'll have an analysis of that. So here's the association with the disliked for those who you don't like, who are displeasing and or those and unpleasurable sights, sounds, smell, taste, and touches, or panasate honti, or whatever is not leading to the goal, or whoever is not doesn't have your best interests at heart, who doesn't wish you benefit, who doesn't wish you to live happily, and doesn't wish you to be free from bondage, then hanging around and association and being together and being mixed with such is called associating with the disliked. So it has that analysis, whereas the sutta, at least in this edition of it, doesn't have that. You may find different editions of the suttas will have different readings on that point. Okay, so lamentation. So someone who has some sort of misfortune or other, who's touched by some sort of pain or another, there are laments, great laments, great lamenting, the state of lamenting and great lamentation. Okay, so again, just all formed from the same roots. And what's dukkha? Kaya sampasajang dukkang asatang vedayitang. So whatever is pain born of contact with the body and disagreeable feeling. So the important point here is that the dukkha in dukkha domanassa is physical pain. So this is an important point to understand when reading the suttas, that normally dukkha has a number of different meanings. The most broad meaning is as existential dukkha, so that's the suffering in the Four Noble Truths, is all kinds of dukkha, whether feeling or not feeling. But specifically as a painful feeling, if it's used by itself, it means all kinds of painful feeling. But if it's used as it is here, together with domanassa, then it means specifically physical painful feeling. Kaya sampasajang dukkha. Whereas the domanassa is mano sampasajang dukkha. Okay, jetasikang dukkha, jetasikang asatang. So mental suffering and mental disagreeableness is domanassa. So what's upayasa? Somebody who has some sort of misfortune and is despondency, despondency and despair. It means like despair. It's actually a little bit different, and despair is actually despair. It's a little bit controversial, including despair in that definition, because despair has a slightly more specific meaning, and despair means specifically giving up hope, whereas upayasa doesn't necessarily mean giving up hope. Yeah, so the relationship between soka, parideva and upayasa is described in the Visuddhimagga by a pot boiling on a stove. You know that image? You boil up milk in a pot, and when it's heating up, then that's the soka, right? It's sorrow. When it boils over is the parideva. That's a lamentation. And when it's boiled over and dried up in the pot, and you keep on heating it and heating it and heating it, that's the upayasa. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a memorable. It's a memorable image. Yeah.
Well, in Thai it has like a different feeling. Kap kan jai means like you're just like really full of like this unease, like fills your heart kind of feeling. It has this different feeling. I can't quite translate it.
Different feeling to upayasa.
Like despondent feels like sad.
Right.
But this is more like you know.
So more like anxiety.
Not anxiety, but a sense of just ill at ease that fills the heart.
Okay, ill at ease that fills the heart. Okay, so what is not getting what you want is suffering. To those beings who are subject to birth, then this longing arises. Aho, watamayang najati dhammasana. Natawatano dati agataya. May we not be subject to birth. May birth not come again. Na ko panetangitaya patabang. But you can't get it just because you want it. So suck that one up. As Mick Jagger said, yeah, can't always get what you want. So as beings subject to old age, Aho vatamayam jaradhama sama nata vatano jara agateya. May we not be subject to old age, may old age not come again. But you can't get it just by wishing for it. Those subject to sickness, curious, huh? Little editorial moment here, isn't it? We haven't had mention of sickness before, but now we have. Those subject to sickness, may sickness not come again. Subject to death, may be wishing for it, but you can't get it because you wish it. May I don't not have sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair, but you can't get it just by wishing for it. Okay, so, and what does it mean to say in brief the 5 aggregates of grasping, suffering? So notice here that it's introducing this whole topic of the khandhas, and that itself can be understood as then being explained further in the Buddha's life in the Anattalakkhana Sutta. So he goes here, he says Rupa Khandha, Vedana Khandha, Sanya Khandha, Sankhara Khandha, Vijnana Khandha. So the 5 khandhas: form, feeling, perceptions, activities and consciousness. Of course, in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, when it was taught originally, the very next sutta was the Anattalakkhana Sutta, which went on to teach the khandhas in some more detail. So when you come back to this list here in the Vibhanga, notice how the Sattva Vibhanga here is included as number 4, right? And it's kind of included, it's just a list. This is just a linear list, one topic, another topic, another topic, another topic, and so on. But actually, that's a bit misleading, isn't it? Because these aren't really kind of separate topics. In fact, all of these are really subtopics of the Four Noble Truths. As the Buddha said in the Mahahatipadopama Sutta, or was the Buddha or Sariputta said that? Anyway, as somebody said in the Mahahatipadopama Sutta, all the footprints of all elephants can be included within the footprints of all animals can be included in the footprint of the elephant, and leaving aside T-Rex and other things, but just so all of the teachings can be included within the Four Noble Truths. So actually, if you look at it, the First Noble Truth of suffering, we've all just been told that the khandhas come within this First Noble Truth of suffering, and similarly the ayatanas, dhatus mostly, indriyas, and these ones mostly come within the path, satipatthana, right efforts and so on. Paticcasamuppada is, of course, origin and cessation, so this comes in the Second and Third Noble Truths. So actually you could, rather than doing it purely as a list, you could do it as a hierarchical structure where you break this one down into the Four Noble Truths and then include each of those under the Four Noble Truths. It's a more kind of organic presentation.
Is it all in the right order for that?
It's not, and although it's what you find with these lists is that they're often like this one. It's roughly in the right order. Yeah. It starts out with mostly those ones which are in the First Noble Truth, dependent origination, Second and Third Noble Truths, and then these guys are all on the path. But then it's not quite there. The list breaks down kind of at the end with these miscellaneous ones, and the Four Noble Truths themselves, well, where do they fit? I mean, more logically they'd be at the beginning, but they're not, and so they tend to vary in their position. But you can see it's somewhat ordered like that. So you can and as is, and that is also following the sequence in the not exactly, but more or less following the sequence in the Samyutta Nikaya itself. Because Samyutta Nikaya, the last Samyutta Nikaya is all of these topics. Yeah, the Mahavagga of the Samyutta Nikaya. Except in Samyutta, the Paticcasamuppada is earlier. So that gets swapped around. So the sequence is always a bit different, but it still seems to have some reference to the basic framework of the Four Noble Truths.
I know one different here. The explanation of the dukkha factor, the tracking of two things, the associated with without one and separation from the without one is not here.
That's right, yeah, we already mentioned that. Maybe wait while you're out, yeah. So the second Noble Truth, what is this? The Dukkha Samudaya Arya Satcha, the origin of suffering. What is that craving that leads to rebirth? Yayang tanha pono bhavika. Nandi raga sahagata, connected with enjoyment and passion. Tatra tatra bhinandini, which greatly enjoys this and that. I'm not quite sure whether that's a correct translation. Greatly enjoys this and that. The tatra is actually is a locative form, and it means here and there. So delighting here and there. And notice the similarity of that idiom. Tatra. It's actually the same idiom that we've already found before in the discussion of birth. Right? Tamhi Sacca Nikaya. It's a different grammatical case, but it's the same idiom. Where are we? So Tamhi Sacca Nikaya. Tamhi Sacca Nikaya. And then down a little bit below, the tatra binandini. So what I think that tatra binandini means basically is delighting in various states of rebirth. So this is the Tamhi Sacca Nikaya, is the various classes of beings, and the tatra binandini is delighting in those various classes of beings or various states of rebirth.
I think the Buddhist translation is delighting in this and that.
I think it's like seeking pleasure, now here, now there. That's nice.
Here and there.
Here and there is more literal, yeah.
But it's not that sense of delighting in different realms.
Yeah, see, this is where the notion of rebirth is so fundamental in the canon that it's actually often you find these kinds of idioms where it's just assuming that that's what it's talking about. Whereas and it's very easy to miss that when you're in the modern translations because they don't have the same connotation. I mean, a similar problem would be, say, for example, with the notion of vijnana, which we translate as consciousness. Now, in the Western world, consciousness has nothing to do with the notion of rebirth. If we talk about rebirth in Western idioms, you talk about the soul or the spirit or something like that. And consciousness is not something which has any connection with that. But in the Pali, it clearly does. And there's many contexts that talk about the vijnana, which takes rebirth in one place or another. As, similar with, and that's evolved into the Thai usage where vijnana means ghost. So tatra means there. Here's the dictionary. Yeah, so anyway, I would translate that as greatly enjoying here and there. Craving for sense pleasures, craving for continuation. Discontinuation, existence. More literally, bhavatanha, existence. This is the origin of suffering. So notice that the analysis here of the origin and the ending of suffering is still relatively brief. And we find that this is much extended when you come to the Sariputta Sutta, which gives the same analysis as found in the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta, but with a much extended analysis, much more in line with the Abhidhammas, being one of the reasons why I concluded that the Sariputta Sutta is a proto-Abhidhamma text and is later than the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta. So the Dukkha Nirodha Satchang, same standard definition from the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, Yotasa yeva tanhaya asesa viraga nirodho chago parinisaggo mutti analayo, the complete fading away and cessation without remainder of that same craving, the liberation, chaga, parinisaggo, letting go, release, mutti, and non-adherence, analayo. Okay, so what's the way of practice leading to the ending of suffering? That's the Noble Eightfold Path, that is to say, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right endeavour, sticking with an under-devotee's translation as much as I can, right mindfulness, right concentration, and what is right view? So then goes on to, so that part, up to this far, is also found in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and we're now going into more detail on each factor, and these details not found in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, but they are found in other places, especially in the Majjhima Vibhanga Sutta, where in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Magga Samyutta has the Magga Vibhanga Sutta, which analyses all of these. So the path is included in the truths. That, venerable friends, which is knowledge about suffering, dukkha jnana, dukkha, knowledge about the arising of suffering, about the cessation of suffering, and about the way of practice leading to the cessation of suffering, this is called right view. So in other words, right view here is defined as insight or knowledge into the Four Noble Truths themselves. What is right thought, right intention, net kamma sankappa, the intention or motivation perhaps, of renunciation, of goodwill, or non-ill will, more literally, and non-violence. It's called right intention. What's right speech? Refraining from false speech, refraining from malicious speech, refraining from harsh speech, refraining from frivolous speech. This is right speech. It's called right action. Refraining from killing living creatures, refraining from taking what is not given, refraining from sexual misconduct. It's right action. What's right livelihood? What?
In the other one is Majjhima Nikaya, that's the brahmacharya.
I think there is some ambiguity in that one as well. Yeah, whether it's kamesumachachara or a brahmacharya. Yeah.
And the one we chant on Wednesdays it says a brahmacharya, right? The one.
Oh, I can't remember now.
It does. It says a brahmacharya.
It says a brahmacharya. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So. So there you go. Yeah, there is some ambiguity on that point. Yeah, whether it's kamesumachachara or a brahmacharya. One would think that it's kamesumachachara, some of the more general one.
Yeah, for the Winnicus, the monks would understand why to be a brahmacharya.
Yeah. And what's right livelihood? Here, a noble disciple refraining from wrong livelihood makes his living by right livelihood. Yeah, perhaps not as useful as it might be. What's right effort? Here a monk generates desire not to take up bad and unwholesome things that have not yet arisen. In this regard he endeavours and instigates energy, exerts his mind and makes an effort. And also to give up bad kusala dhammas that have already arisen, to give rise to wholesome dhammas that have not yet arisen, and for the endurance of the wholesome dhammas that have arisen, their non-forgetting multiplication, extension, development and fulfillment. He endeavours, instigates energy, exerts his mind and makes an effort. So the standard definition of the four right efforts. It's right mindfulness. Here, because bhikkhu kaya nupasi viharati, dwells contemplating body in the body, and clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness, after removing avarice and sorrow regarding the world. Contemplates the feeling of feelings, contemplates the nature of feelings you put in there. Curious addition. Anyway, clearly knowing and mindful after removing avarice and sorrow regarding the world. Contemplates the mind, contemplating the Dhamma, things, contemplates things in things. That's quite a good rendering. Dhammesu dhammanupasi viharati. He dwells contemplating things in things, stuff in stuff. Okay, that's right mindfulness and right concentration. Of course, as always, the four jhanas. Idhavaso bhikkhu vivitya vakamehi vivitya akusalehi dhammehi savitakang savicharang vivekajang piti sukhang patamang jhanang upasampadja viharati. And this is the way of practice leading to the ending of suffering. And then Sariputta sums up the realised one, friends, the worthy one, the perfect Sambuddha, while near Benares in the deer park at Isipatana, has set rolling the unsurpassed Dhamma wheel, and it cannot be rolled back by any ascetic or Brahmin or god or demon or deity by anyone in the world. That is to say, the explanation, revealing, making known, setting forth, opening up, analysing and making plain of these four noble truths. This is what the Venerable Sariputta said, and those monks were uplifted and greatly rejoiced in Venerable Sariputta's words.
That's it? That's the whole thing?
That's it.
I thought it would go into the truths more than that. Like it doesn't seem like it provides that much more detail.
Well, you're quite right. The analysis of the path, as I said, is essentially the same as that found in the Magga Vibhanga. So that's the standard. And the second and third noble truths it just pretty much just repeats what's found in the Dhammacakka. It doesn't give much any more information, and it's only really the first noble truth that it gives more explanation.
Yeah, but even then, it seemed pretty. I guess how much more can you say? But still, it just felt so like listy. That's it. Like I thought it would get into. It's
listy. Well, that's Sariputta's.
Somehow.
Yeah, that's Sariputta's style. Yeah, so it's more of an analytical style rather than a expository style. But one thing to remember also, though, is that in giving these teachings, I mean, one of if you come back to this idea of the Dhamma as a whole, yeah, and this idea that every teaching is in some way an explanation of the Four Noble Truths. So that means that every time you hear the Buddha teaching even a little bit, you're learning a little bit more about the Four Noble Truths. And to me, that reflects something which is quite important about the nature of knowledge, which is that you tend to learn things like that, don't you? You get a bit here and a bit there, and they gradually accumulate. And that's one thing where you do see that shift in emphasis in the Abhidhamma period towards making a more systematic thing. Everything is listed and everything has its place, and you're supposed to learn the whole lot of it, rather than learning what's relevant for you at that time. So that tendency, you can see that systematic tendency starting here and developing much more. But you can also just understand that idea of giving sort of drops of information, bits and pieces at a time, is much more suitable for an oral text. Yeah, because you're sitting there in one period of time, and I'm sure you feel like that at the end of a sutta class, right? Once you've been there for an hour or so, an hour or two, then you're going, you can't take in much more, and you have to have a break. Yeah, and so this is why I think almost all of the suttas, you do have a limit to how much information is presented at each one time. It's enough that you can assimilate at that time. Whereas in the Abhidhamma, I mean, the beginnings of the Abhidhamma is still an oral tradition, but it became a written tradition. It's something. It's not just something you learn at that time, but it's a text you learn and study over a long period of time. So that's why you can assimilate that whole thing. Yeah. So if you think about it like that, then this particular text is a detailed exposition of the Four Noble Truths, but it's distinguished mainly by the fact of its systematic approach, and actually every other sutta in the canon is also looking at the Four Noble Truths, maybe in a less explicit way, but in one way or another.
So where did that concept of like the three kinds of suffering come up? Was that in the Abhidhamma? Was it commentary?
No, that's in the suttas as well. Yeah.
So where I expected it would be here.
Right. Yeah.
So where would it be?
The three kinds of suffering. It's probably in the Anguttara Threes.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. So, and exactly that's the kind of problem which the Abhidhamma then addresses, right? That you have, the Buddha approached the same topic from different angles at different times in different places, and you don't necessarily find in the suttas an explicit explanation of all those points. So suttas like this go some way towards presenting things in a more systematic way, but there's still a lot of things which are not systematized. An example of that would be, how does this relate to? We've had the Eightfold Path, but we also have all the other teachings on practice. What about the Indriyas, the Balas, the Iddhipadas? How do they fit into there? Now we assume that they're different ways of presenting the way of practice, the path, but the sutra itself doesn't exactly tell us that. So this is what the Abhidhamma does, is it takes up all of those problems and tries to resolve them. And of course, the problem that it runs into very quickly is basically becomes a problem of abstraction. So this is essentially the problem of the Abhidhamma. When you try to resolve things, they're formulated in different ways, and so to make them agree, you have to sort of go up to another level of abstraction to make them all agree. Right? but then, which is fine. You can make them agree, but you're more abstract. Yeah, you've moved yourself away from that groundedness of the suttas into an abstract realm, which is again has its purpose as a explanation tool, right? It has a purpose.
Does that force the agreement? Like when they're actually inconsistencies on the ground in context?
It can. That's one problem. You might not do it right? There may be things which are actually disagreeing, and then you're making them as if they do agree. That's one thing. Another thing you can be doing, of course, is introducing your own ideas and saying that this is what the sutta is saying. Is another problem. But even leaving aside those problems, even assuming that you've done it well and properly and everything's right without any mistake, you've still ended up with a system which is far more abstract than anything that you have in the suttas. It's removed from that real life experience. Just like we saw the explanation of dukkha in the Abhidhamma Bhajaniya, right? So the suttas, what's dukkha? The breaking of the teeth, the greying of the hair. It's very concrete. Whereas in the Abhidhamma, it's the remaining defilements, the remaining unwholesome dhammas, the 3 wholesome roots with defilements, the remaining defiled wholesome dhammas. So what's defiled wholesome dhammas? Defiled wholesome and unwholesome dhamma results, and those dhammas which are functional and are not wholesome nor unwholesome, nor the result of karma, and all physical form. This is called dukkha, right? So now that explanation may or may not be correct, right? So that's one thing.
But isn't that sort of like...
But it's clearly...
5 khandhas? Like that's really talking about 5 khandhas.
Yeah, but that's another explanation. Yeah,
but I'm saying the 5 khandhas is part of that list. I mean, the breaking of teeth and all that, but ultimately the last part is
the 5 khandhas, yeah.
So that's just a more complicated, weird version of 5 khandhas.
Well, not really. It doesn't really refer to the 5 khandhas at all. It's talking about defilements, rupa, yeah.
Everything else was the nama part, all the
Yeah, but it's, but then again, you're now abhidhammaing the Abhidhamma, right? Yeah, it's not actually what it says. So it has, and the further you go with that process, the more those things become abstracted. So in the later Abhidhamma, the early Abhidhamma is concerned to explain and to show the relationship between all of those teachings and suttas. In the later Abhidhamma, most of those teachings are all abandoned. So the later Abhidhamma doesn't really talk much about the khandhas and all of these kinds of things. They've been pretty much left behind because of that process of abstraction. And so you have, instead of that, you have the chitta, cetasika, nama, rupa, and all of the other sort of characteristic vocabulary of the Abhidhamma, which, for all intents and purposes, replaces the categories talked about in the suttas.
You caught my attention the other day saying that presenting the Buddhist teaching as causality is incorrect, because you can't experience something called causality. You can experience recurring patterns. So when you really caught my attention with that. Now when you're talking about the Abhidhamma getting integrated in greater abstraction, I see a very similar problem. How you can't get your mind around that. But that's not something you can't see those things from that list.
Exactly, yeah.
You can't see them manifesting day to day and
exactly.
work with that for your benefit.
Exactly, and that's the essence again of the Nagarjuna's critique of the Abhidhamma, is that it became so abstracted that it assumed that these metaphysical and unknowable entities were the ultimate reality. So rather than being used as something to explain reality, it's like a perfect description of what reality is. Yeah.
So this was getting criticized even way back then in the day of Nagarjuna.
Yeah. So and so it's clearly a and even in the Theravada Abhidhamma itself, in the Abhidhamma commentaries, it has an interesting little passage in the introduction to the Attasalini, is the commentary to the Abhidhamma, and when it's just having the introductory discussion, it says, some people, somebody says, some people say that the Abhidhamma wasn't really spoken by the Buddha, and the response to that, and then it gives this very, very funny and very colourful response, which is like the remarks of a fairly acerbic teacher to their student. Well, you must have been falling asleep down the back of the class and not paying attention when the basic ABCs of Dhamma was taught, because it's obvious that the Buddha taught the Abhidhamma for XYZ reasons. So, clearly even within the Mahavihara, there were troublesome students at the back of the class who were saying, but the Buddha didn't really teach this stuff. And
many of us have been reborn since.
So, that's a dialogue within the tradition that's been happening since the beginning.
Is this the sutta that kind of some party was corrupted with the Abhidhamma definitions of Santi? Is this this?
You're referring to what I did in History of Mindfulness? Or what are you referring to?
No, I'm referring to certain thing you said 3-4 years ago.
Yeah. Yes, now I know exactly what you're saying, yeah.
I thought there's a text that
quite likely, yeah.
expanding the Four Noble Truth, and it was corrupted with a few words from the Abhidhamma.
Yeah, yes, no, I remember, right? Yes, no. This is the same. This is the same. The same textual body, right? But it's not it's not this exact recension that was talking about. I'm just trying to remember where that is. No, and we haven't found those in that. In that exact recension, but I'm just trying to remember what it is. I know I have it in the back of my head, but I can't remember exactly what the terms are. I think it's a Sariputta Sutta, and the terms are... yes, I think so.
Bhante, you do say in History of Mindfulness that some additions to the Sariputta Sutta ended up getting into the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta.
Yeah, look, I can't remember, it's so many years ago. But there are also different readings in different texts. So let me just have a look here, just so if I can remember. This is this phrase here, Jivitindriya Supachedo. That's specifically the phrase that I was referring to. So this is very, very much an Abhidhamma kind of idiom, is the life faculty, the cutting off of the life faculty. Now, yeah, so that's an Abhidhamma term. Now we've seen in that's under the definition of death. Now in it's not in this one. Now Maranang, okay, so Kandhanang Bedang Kalebarasanic Kepo. So in this particular text we don't find that. So that's probably the earlier reading. However, this is something where you are likely to find variants in the recensions, yeah. And the Burmese one, of course, is always more likely to be corrupted by later Abhidhamma additions. Let's have a look here. So this is the World Tipitaka text, and this is based on the Sixth Council Burmese text. It's supposed to be World Tipitaka, but in fact it's Burmese. Okay, Jati Jara Maranan. Okay, and here we have it. Jivitindriya Supachedo. Okay? The cutting off of the life faculty. Yeah? So this is a very Abhidhammic sounding term, not in Ananda Jyoti's text. Now I'm not sure where Ananda Jyoti might say where he's got his text from. Translated, it doesn't say. But presumably it might be from a Sri Lankan Sri Lankan background rather than a Burmese one.
So Bhikkhu Bodhi used to Sri Lanka?
I don't even know what this one is. Crikey. Yeah. Bhikkhu Bodhi actually... crikey. Bhikkhu Bodhi actually... I've never even seen this one before. Right, yeah, see, this is the Buddha Jayanti edition, but the Buddha Jayanti is based on the Burmese edition.
What? Really?
Yeah. So this is all based on what's called the Sixth Council edition, which is supposed to be the critical world edition, but basically it's the Burmese edition.
Sixth Council, when was that again?
That was in 1956 or something like that in Burma.
Oh. So...
And they invited the Sri Lankan monks and the Thai monks there, so they were all kind of there, but Mahasi Sayadaw presided over everything. And according to first-hand accounts of people who were there, basically there wasn't really any serious text critical work. The Burmese just did their one, the Thais did theirs, the Sri Lankans did theirs, and they didn't really sort of collate an official world Tripitaka, which is what they should have done. So this website is that text formed the basis for pretty much all subsequent digital editions of the canon. Not all of them, but most of them.
What do you mean that the Sri Lankans did their stuff, the Burmese did their stuff, and the Thais did they all went to the same place and they all just did their work on their own homework?
That's what I'm told, yeah.
Oh. But did they all produce something that was like, this is the authoritative edition?
Well, there was one which was produced, which was the authoritative one, but that was the Burmese, essentially the Burmese text. When we say essentially the Burmese text, I'll show you what I mean. There's some very simple things that you can see for that. Maranang Paridevang Tamawayamo. Okay, so for example here, look at the word virya. Right? This word virya, with a long I at the beginning, is incorrect. Okay, the word virya has a short I at the beginning, and all the Sinhalese and probably Thai editions have a short I there. But that's actually a grammatical issue in Pali, and the issue is this: the root of the word is vira, meaning hero. You then go vira, and you add an abstract ending to make it a abstract noun, heroism. Yeah? So then you go virya, which is how it's spelt in Sanskrit. But in various dialects, in various dialects, you don't have that. Notice how you've then got the long vowel and then two consonants.
Yeah.
So what that tends to do in a lot of dialects is to squash the vowel. So then you'd have virya, you'd lose that long I. Yeah? But then other dialects don't like to have a ry, don't like to have that consonant conjunct. So Pali, for example, doesn't really tolerate that. So what you would then do is insert another I there, and you have virya. And that is the Pali form for the word. And that just not only tells you the Pali form, but it also tells you something about the dialectical progression. It must have come down some way in that through that sequence of dialects. It's first gone into a dialect that didn't tolerate the long I, and then it went into a dialect that didn't tolerate the ry, not the other way round. But the problem is that once you've inserted that I there, the problem with the long I at the beginning is not there anymore. So you see that? Yeah. So you see, we had to get rid of that long I because we didn't want to have a long I and then two consonants. But now we don't have a long I and two consonants. We put another vowel in between there, so we don't have the consonant cluster. So we can now have virya. Oops. Virya. And that's the form that we find in the Burmese text. So the actual colloquial Pali form is virya. And virya is a grammarian's abstraction.
Based on knowledge of Sanskrit, probably.
Quite possibly, yeah. Yeah, they do. In Burma, they do teach and study Sanskrit. Yeah. So so what and you find similar kinds of situations with the spelling of a few different words. The case of Surya, the sun, is exactly the same, and there's a few others as well. So that kind of spelling is very characteristic of the Burmese recension. It's not the sort of native or colloquial Pali spelling, and so that's a sign that this text consistently uses those Burmese variants when there's a choice between the Burmese or the more colloquial version, which is what you tend to find in the Sinhalese texts, will tend to have more authentic. The Thai also tends to be more authentic. Actually, if you compare the Burmese, the Sinhalese, and the Thai manuscripts, the tendency is that the traditional Sri Lankan manuscripts are the most authentic. They're probably the closest to the actual old Pali. But they're not so consistently or well edited, which itself is probably a sign of authenticity. The Thai manuscript, the Chula Chomklao one, which we looked at earlier, is very consistently and well edited. So it's actually, in terms of a text, is perhaps the best. And the Burmese is the one which adds the most later additions, especially influenced by the commentaries, by the commentaries in the Abhidhamma. Yeah.
When I heard the chanting from Burmese monk, Thai monk, and Cambodian monk, I see that Cambodian monks make most of the music in the pronunciation of Pali. They can't chant certain Pali word.
Yeah.
But for the Sri Lankan monk, they can chant everything very.
Of course, yeah.
I think one thing because the Sri Lankan people and the Pali language very close, but Sri Lankan are migrant of the North Indian. And originally they instruction as the same family.
Yeah.
So they retain the language. Even now the Sinhalese language are still very close. About 60% is Pali vocabulary. Still retain and the grammar. Grammar and vocabulary. The 60% is retained. Pali original.
Yeah. So definitely that's the best pronunciation. So where we go? So yes, there is that variant reading. So in the Burmese reading of the Sacca Vibhanga Sutta has incorporated this Jivitindriya Supachero, whereas others, presumably Sri Lankan, I guess, Nanda Jyoti's working on, hasn't. Okay, so we've been going on for quite some time, so we should stop.